So today's lesson, some feedback has been that a couple of people wanted something a little bit more advanced. So we are going to be taking a look at a game that was played by a world champion. And in fact, there's a bit of a story to it. But before we get onto that, I'm just going to show you guys the website for the World Chess Championships, which is on at the moment. And Stephen's asked, is this the most boring match for a number of years, or most boring World Championship match? And to be honest, it's a pretty slow-paced match at the moment. So they've played 12 games so far in this match, and the match is between two players, Vishy Anand and Boris Gelfand, who are playing against each other 12 games to see who can become the new world champion. Anand is the reigning champion, so Gelfand has to defeat him to become the world champion. After 12 games, it's tied up 6-all, and they've only won one game each with 10 draws. And a lot of those draws have been quite short and boring draws where no one's really taking any risks. We do now move into a sort of more exciting phase of the match where they're going to be playing 4 games at a much faster time control. So they're going to be playing games with 25 minutes each plus 10 seconds, which that ends up each game lasting sort of a maximum of 1 hour, which for you guys, kids out there at schools, might seem like a long time. That's the sort of amount of time that you would use at national championships for the national interschool championship time controls. For the World Championships, it's a very quick game. Most of the games at the moment are being, even though they're short and fairly boring, are still taking 3 and 4 hours to play each game. So to cut that down to 1 hour is going to hopefully make things a little bit more exciting. And as we get closer and closer to the sudden death playoff, hopefully some of these players take a few more risks and unleash some perhaps preparation that they've been working on from home. So that's the official website. You can just Google World Chess Championships and you'll find that if you want to find out a little bit more about that match that's going on at the moment. So anyone who's got any questions or comments or things that they'd like to say, please just type those things into your chat box, into your questions. Those show up on my screen, and we've got Shanti on the line as well, who will try and either type through answers or answer as many questions as you've got. So this game that we're going to be looking at today is a game by possibly the greatest world champion of all time. His name was Garry Kasparov, and he was world champion for nearly 20 years. And this is a game that he played in 1997 in a match against a computer programmed by IBM. So IBM went out and programmed a computer that could play chess, and this was back in 1996, 97, so around about the time when the Matrix movies were coming out, and people were a bit concerned about dystopian futures where computers learn how to think and become sentient and take over the world and enslave all of humankind. So this match, IBM's computer against Kasparov, was sort of seen as man versus machine, for the future of humanity. If humans could get defeated at the ultimate thinking game, which is what chess really is, then we'd have no hope for the future. So Kasparov had, I guess, a fair bit of pressure on him. He was playing this match in New York in one of the big basketball stadiums. So if you imagine if you're in Melbourne playing a chess game in the MCG or at Vodafone Arena or somewhere like that, and there was huge crowds, and it really was quite a big thing and quite a lot of pressure. They were playing 6 games, and at the end of 6 games, the winner would take home just over $1 million, and the loser was taking home about $600,000, which is not too different from what the World Championship match today, the World Championship match that's being played today. The total prize pool's $2.55 million, so just over $2.5 million, and the winner takes home about 60% of that. So just over just over $1.5 million for winning the World Championship. So it's pretty decent prize money if you can get to the top. So in this match, there were 6 games to see who won the $1 million, and after the first 5 games, the scores were all tied up 2.5 to 2.5. And this was the final game. And in the final game, we've got Deep Blue, the computer is white, and Gary Kasparov's playing black here. So we're going to have a look through this game, and we're going to try and see some of the strategies that both of these players use, because to even get to this point, the computer is obviously going to be using some extremely good strategies. Now, a couple of years prior to this match, there was IBM challenged Gary Kasparov previously, and the computer that they played previously sort of got thrashed pretty soundly. And the original computer program was really just thinking of tactics or tricks. It was planning forwards. If I do this, he does that. I do this, he does that, and thinking forwards 2, 3, 4, 5 steps ahead for each move that it was planning out. It was planning forwards as far as it possibly could. Now, thinking steps ahead is only half of the game of chess. So without good strategies, you're still not going to be able to win the game. So strategy is about what you're planning to do. It's about your goals and objectives, and you can sort of forget in strategy anything about what your opponent's up to. It's just what you're aiming for. That's half of the game, and then the other half is the tactics, which is what computers are notoriously good at. This was the first computer that really they tried to program in some sensible strategies to complement the tactics as well, because it's all very well thinking, a million different moves a second, which is what this computer was thinking at the time, a million different possibilities every single second. But with the complexity of chess, that gets used up very quickly. So a game of chess, just the first 3 moves, there's 90 million different possibilities. So if you want to try and work out every single possibility, the computer's spending already 1.5 minutes just for the first 3 moves. And then it gets larger and larger and larger exponentially. So there is no way that a computer, they've got supercomputers that are just sitting away, just chugging away, trying to solve every single different move in a game of chess to try and work out with best moves who wins the game. And they think that those computers will finish calculating the game. These were started many, many years ago. One of them started in the 70s trying to calculate every single possible move in a game of chess. These computers will calculate and keep calculating at their current rate. They'll be going sometime until close to when the sun explodes in a couple of billion years. So there's a lot of possibilities in the game of chess that can be analysed, and you'll never get through all of them. So you need strategies that will help you to choose your moves. So the computer had been programmed in with just 3 strategies, and they're 3 strategies that we've talked about before. The 3 golden rules, so that's control the centre of the board, develop your pieces, get your pieces off the back row, and castle. Now you'll see with those 3 strategies combined with a few tricks and tactics, thinking a few steps ahead, you will find that this ends up being a very close and very exciting game. So the computer's first move, advancing pawn to e4. So what it's doing there, controlling the centre of the board, the #1 strategy of all time. So you've just got to always, at the start of the game, aim for the 4 squares in the centre of the board. 1, 2, 3, 4. So those 4 squares in the centre of the board are the most powerful. From that area, right, you can then attack left, you can attack right, you can attack forwards, backwards, whichever direction you like. You're actually closer to every other part of the board. So controlling the centre of the board makes your job for the rest of the game much, much easier. All right, let's see what see what happens from here. Gary Kasparov's move is an interesting one. It's called the Caro-Kann opening when you play pawn to c6. And the idea is that black wants to try and attack in the centre of the board, right? But attack in the centre of the board here with already some protection from his pawn. So he's sort of setting it up not for this move, but for what's going to happen next move. So continuing on with the game, computer plays pawn to d4, and we've got our 2 pawns side by side in the centre of the board. That's your most powerful attacking formation. We call that a pawn wall. So there we go. Computer's just following the strategies, not really thinking lots of moves ahead at the moment, just thinking, how do I control the centre more? How do I get more pieces into the attack? How do I do castling? Black plays pawn to d5, and that sets up, like we said before, his plan was to try and set up a pawn chain, the 3 pawns in the diagonal line there, setting up a chain to try and fight for the centre of the board, but without doing a symmetrical game. Okay, so he doesn't want to do exactly the same thing. White computer moves his knight off the back row, controlling the centre of the board, and now Kasparov can't really allow that wall of pawns in the centre of the board. That's too strong. 2 pawns next to each other like that in the centre, that wall of pawns is very powerful, and if Kasparov just allows that to stay there, then yeah, he's going to get squashed. His opponent's got too much strength there in the middle of the board, so he has to play pawn takes pawn and try and break down that wall of pawns and swap them off. After that exchange, we can see that the computer's position in the middle of the board is already better. His computer's got a pawn and a knight controlling the centre, and Garry Kasparov's got nothing in the middle of the board yet. So we'll have to see. Kasparov's got to make his comeback, and he's got to fight back towards the middle of the board. Okay, his next move for Kasparov is knight to d7, which is a good move for getting a piece off the back row, but you will notice it blocks this bishop from coming into the attack, and it sort of blocks the queen as well. So there are some drawbacks to developing that knight, but generally getting the knight off the back row is a good idea. Now this move that computer played is really probably the only strange move that he plays for the whole game, because normally you'd be thinking, well, we want to try and get all of our pieces off the back row. So here computer's only got one piece off the back row and into the attack, right? Just that one knight, right? So the logical thing to do would be to try and find some other pieces, like the knight, the bishop, the queen, any of those pieces that are on the back row, and start bringing those off the back row and into the attack. That would be the logical thing to do. Right? It's controlling the centre of the board. So now the question is, well, how do I get some pieces off the back row and attacking? What's happening here is the computer is thinking so far ahead. He's thinking, you know, literally a million moves a second, and is trying to calculate what does the computer think is going to happen later on in the game. And the computer is betting on Kasparov castling on this side of on the king side, castling on this side of the board to the right at some point. And he figures that if he castles, then the computer is going to want his knight over here to start attacking. So it's a hard move to try and understand unless you realize that he's thinking, you know, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, maybe even 15 moves into the future. The other good thing about putting the knight there is it does start to attack the weak spot. That's the weak spot on f7, the square that's protected by black's king and by no other pieces. So there is, I guess, some opportunity to make some threats and do some attack even at the start of the game. Kasparov plays pawn to e6, good move, getting his bishop ready to come into the attack, freeing up his queen. Bishop comes off the back row, knight develops, and knight develops. So all good moves here. Computer's following the strategies very soundly. Like, you'll see that because the computer is programmed in, it can't really think. Like, even though it's got strategies, it's not really thinking about the strategies in the same way that you or I would think about stuff. They're not doing it consciously. He's still got to do exactly what he was programmed to do. But for chess, that's probably a good thing, because he's been programmed, control the center of the board. That's the most important area. You know, he's been programmed, all these pieces along the back row, bring them off the back row and get them into the attack. Right, so if you guys can do that in your games, right, if you just make sure that you're controlling the center of the board, those 4 squares there that we've seen in the middle of the board, if we can control that area, if we can get all our pieces off the back row into the attack, we'll always have a good position. Okay, always have a good position. Black's next move, pawn to h6, and there's a little red question mark next to that move, and a question mark in chess notation means bad move. Now, it doesn't look like a bad move. In fact, even grandmasters who were watching this game live thought, oh yeah, that's not so bad. The pawn's coming up, it's attacking the knight, so the pawn's threatening to take the knight next move. So what can be bad about a move which threatens your opponent? Well, the bad thing's not so much about what it does, but what about it doesn't do. Right? Moving the pawn to h6 doesn't help Kasparov control the center of the board anymore. And we've already seen that the center of the board, here in the middle, those four squares, the computer has got, I guess, more domination. He's got a pawn in the center of the board, he's got a bishop that's pointing in and a knight pointing in. But if we just look in those four center squares, white is the only computer, white's the only one with the pawn in that center area. So black should probably be trying to fight back for the center a bit more. If we think about pieces developed, right, white's got a bishop, a knight, and a second knight, all developed off the back row. So that's three pieces into the attack. Garry Kasparov's only got the two knights off the back row and into the attack. So again, on development, I'm trying to get pieces off the back row and attacking. You would think that Kasparov should be trying to get his bishop off the back row and into the attack. But leaving his pieces on the back row is probably not going to be the greatest idea. So pawn to h6 doesn't help with any of the good strategies, and that's why it's a bad move. Not because it's a bad move, but because it doesn't do a good move, and sometimes that's enough to actually make you lose the game. Now, computer's next move was a real surprise move, very unexpected. He plays knight, takes the pawn. Now, normally a knight is worth 3 points and a pawn is worth 1 point. So if you take someone and that pawn can just come and take you back, it's like, well, why would you want to sacrifice a knight for a pawn? So does anyone have any ideas what might happen? What was white's plan if the pawn takes the knight? All right, so just type it into your chat box if you think you might know what computer was planning to do if black's pawn takes out that knight in the middle of the board. All right, he's deliberately doing that, obviously. The computer's planning things through, and knight takes e6. Yep, we've got a couple of suggestions about the weak spot, and that's exactly what we're looking for. This square here on f7, we've seen this square before, is called the weak spot. Right, so if that pawn captures the knight, there's nothing protecting the weak spot. Computer's bishop can zoom in and start putting black's king into check and chasing him out into the open, because you can't block on the weak spot. There's not going to be enough pieces there, so bishop to g6 check is going to start chasing black's king out to the open. So that is a very strong move, and in fact, in this position here, Kasparov spent about 40 minutes, right? About 40 minutes in this situation, because like Joy says, Joy's just said that if the pawn doesn't take the knight, then Kasparov's queen's going to be taken, which is exactly right. Right? He's got to worry about his queen, but he doesn't want to open up his king. So for 40 minutes he was thinking about this move and came up with a move that he thought was pretty good, which was to move the knight, to move the queen, and use the queen to hold that knight into place. All right? So if the knight moves away, the queen's going to be coming straight through and putting white's king in check. So that knight's locked in. Ideally, what a computer would like to do would be to move his knight into c7, and then when the knight goes into c7, we say check, and then next move, take the rook. We've got a nice fork. Right? But the move that Kasparov's played prevents that. Queen e7 pins the knight, and so now the knight can't move away. Next move, Kasparov can just use his queen to take the knight. Right? No problems. He hasn't had to open up his king. The queen's going to be putting the king in check. He's taken a knight, which is worth 3 points, and things are starting to move ahead for black. All right, the 3 golden rules. Remember, control the center of the board, develop your pieces, get your king safe by castling. The computer's got that programmed into his mind, and the next move that the computer plays is just castles. Now, apart from the fact that it follows the strategies, it also sets up a really nasty trap for black. If black plays the move that he was originally planning to play, queen takes knight. Right? What move would white play here to completely destroy Kasparov's plan? Once he takes that knight, he's getting in real trouble if you can see what white's next move is going to be. Right? The computer's got all this planned out. Goes, yep, if I castle, get my king safe behind my pawns, I've got my pieces developed. Yep, I'm going to lose a knight still, but he, in fact, wants to lose the knight. Any ideas what the move's going to be? If you do know it, just type it into your chat box and see what move would white do here to really spoil Kasparov's plans. And actually, it wins a queen, to give you the clue. All right, Andrews suggested rook goes across to e1, which is exactly the move that we're going to play. So the next move that the computer would play, and this didn't happen in the game, but if it had happened, Kasparov's queen is going to be gone because the rook moves across to e1. The rook is now threatening the queen. If the queen moves away, it's going to be putting black into check. And now black's got nothing to do to save the queen. Anything that tries to block it off, the rook just takes it, and then next move the rook's going to take the queen anyway. So Kasparov's plans, completely thwarted. If the queen takes the knight and wins the knight like he was planning, computer moves the rook across, sets up a pin, queen and king, and, well, the queen can't move away. So if we go back a step, instead of taking the knight with the queen, unfortunately now black has to take the knight, otherwise we see that nasty move that he was planning before. The knight can come in to c7, and we've got check and then winning the rook. So really black doesn't have much choice here, has to take that knight, and he's got to use the pawn to do it. And what happens now? He's opened up his weak spot. Computer moves the bishop in and says check. All right, so we've got check here. Black's king has to get out of check. All right, 3 things to think about when you're in check. Can I kill, block, or run? Okay, kill, block, or run are the 3 things that that you can do when you're in check. We try and kill the bishop. We try and take it. All right, that bishop's sitting there, putting the king in check. Can't take it. We try and block it off and put something in the way. All right, that square on f7 is where it's checked. So can you put something in the way to block it off? Well, you could put the queen in the way to block it off, but then you're going to lose your queen. So if you can't kill, you can't block, the only thing that you can do is to run away, to move your king. And now things are looking really bad for black, because once you've moved your king, you're not allowed to castle anymore. It's illegal. You've got to castle. It's got to be the first move for your king and the first move for your rook. Once you've moved either your king or your rook, can't do castle anymore. All right, so white's next move, bishop f4, and that is, again, a very simple, logical move. The strategies that white's following: control the center of the board, get pieces off the back row, and castle. All right, and so before, that's the only piece that's sitting on the back row, not in the attack. So it's pretty obvious that you just want to get that piece off the back row, and he picks a spot that is as close to the center of the board as possible, and it also puts the bishop coming right down near the king and blocking off all those black squares. So black's king is going to be locked with those 2 bishops into the middle of the board. And of course, if the king's stuck in the middle, then white's pieces can attack him much more easily. Right? That's why you want to get your king castled, because here white's king can't be attacked from this left-hand side of the board. Right? It's too far to get all the way around and attack the king. Right? You've got to go through the center of the board, and if white's dominating the center, you just block it off. So you want to try and keep your king towards the side. That's why you do castling, to get your king safe. All right, black's move. Black plays pawn to b5, trying to go for a bit of a counter-attack on the queen side, and also it's really the only way that this bishop on c8 can get into the attack. All right? That bishop's just sitting there doing nothing. It's blocked in both directions by either the pawn or the knight. Black's other bishop is blocked in both directions by the queen and the pawn. So he's got to find a way of getting some of those pieces off the back row and into the attack. All right, so best thing to do, or what he thought was the best at the time, pawn to b5, getting his pawn out of the way so the bishop can come into the attack. Computer plays an excellent move here. All right, advancing the pawn on the edge of the board. And you might think, well, hang on a second, we've been talking the whole time about controlling the center. We've been talking the whole time about getting pieces off the back row and into the attack. So how is that a good move? It doesn't control the center. It doesn't get any pieces off the back row and into the attack. Why is it such a good move? And the reason it's such a good move is that to attack somebody's king, right, they're going to try and shelter themselves behind pawns. Right, so black's got a few pawns over on that left-hand side of the board on the queen side, protecting his king. If white can trade off those pawns, there's going to be no defense for black's king. Also, when he trades off pawn for pawn, right, so when those two pawns get traded off, that's going to leave a nice open file for white's rook to come into the attack. Now, if the rook's coming in the attack, that's one of your most powerful pieces. So, excellent move to A, get rid of the defenses, get rid of those pawns that are defending black's king, and B, trying to get his own rook developed into the attack. So it's actually developing a piece in some ways. It's helping to bring that rook into a really attacking position. All right, Kasparov moves the knight in to attack the bishop. Bishop just retreats out of the way. That was fair enough. That was a good move from Kasparov, but an easy one to block. Well, now Kasparov gets his bishop off the back row, and we do our exchange of pawns here for the computer, swapping off pawn for pawn. Getting rid of the pawns makes Kasparov's king a little bit more open, and then plays queen off the back row, queen to d3, and the queen's now threatening that pawn. So excellent move, developing a piece, and the queen's coming out to threaten the pawn. The other thing that's happening is these rooks are protecting each other, and that's a really important strategy for rooks, is rooks always have to protect each other. So Joy's asked which is more powerful out of a rook and a knight, and the rook is more powerful. So what we usually say is a queen is the most powerful. Queen is equal to 9 points. Rook is the next most powerful, and a rook is equal to 5 points. Then knights and bishops, knights or bishops, are both equal to 3 points. So not nearly as powerful. And then a pawn, of course, is the weakest one, is only equal to 1 point. So the queen, 9 points, rook 5 points, knights and bishops 3 each, and a pawn 1. And all those points do is just tell you who's got a stronger army. Doesn't mean you guaranteed to win the game if you've got more points. Like at the start, remember, the computer sacrificed a knight, which was 3 points, for a pawn, which is 1. Right? But in exchange for that, black's king was open, he got to be in check, he's locked in the middle of the board, white's got a lot more pieces developed, so he's got some good advantages for the sacrifice of material. All right, but generally, you do want to stay ahead on points. You want to make sure that you've got more points than your opponent, because that means you've got a bigger army than them. Right? A bigger army is always more likely to win the game. So the queen's just developed itself, so now every single one of, or almost every single one of white's pieces is developed. There's still one more piece, which will come into the game next move. The pawn's threatened, and black plays bishop to c6 to protect that pawn. Right? He's got to keep at least some pawns near his king, and then he's going to try and, Kasparov's going to try and run his king over this direction behind the pawn to keep the king a bit sheltered. Because in the middle of the board where there's no pawns sheltering you, you are pretty vulnerable. So what's the only piece left that white hasn't yet developed into the attack? All right, so we think about it. Yep, that bishop's off the back row in the attack. That's in a good spot. The other bishop's in a good spot. The knight's in a good spot off the back row in the attack. The queen's off the back row in the attack. Notice that they're most of them towards the middle of the board. Even this rook here, right, remember, is attacking and open down the A file. So even that rook is in a good position. But there is one piece that isn't yet in a really good position. It's not attacking. So what's that piece? Because if you were programmed to develop all your pieces, you would need to get that last piece into the attack, because if you don't get that piece in the attack, you haven't developed all your pieces. So the strategy that has been programmed into this computer is develop all of your pieces. It's got almost all of them developed into the attack, but there's just one piece remaining. And we've got a few suggestions. People who've suggested the king, it's correct, the king is not yet in the attack. All right? But the king is the piece that we need to keep safe. So we don't really want to go marching our king out into the middle of the board. All right? We want to keep our king safe behind our barrier of pawns there. So all of white's pawns are sheltering the king. The king really wants to stay where he was. The other suggestion that some people made was not getting the king into the attack, but getting the rook into the attack, which is actually the correct piece. This rook here is not yet attacking. It's helped, definitely helped white because it's castled, so he's got the king safer, but it's not actually threatening any of black's pieces yet. So we've got to get that piece into an attacking position, and the move to do, which we've had Bill suggest that, is just rook to e1. And by moving the rook across one step, it doesn't seem like a very powerful move. It's like, oh, you've only moved it one square, but now the rook is moving all the way down and threatening one of black's pawns. And if the pawn ever moves away, the queen's hiding behind it. So really good move to get the rook into the attack. All right, Kasparov continues with his plan of trying to hide his king over on the left-hand side and the queen side behind his pawns. And now that every single one of the computer's pieces is in a good position and attacking and threatening something, he can play a tactic, a trick. So he plays bishop to f5, allowing himself to get taken. But of course, if he gets taken, the queen's going to be in trouble. Now, the thing to think about is, well, what happens if black doesn't take that bishop? And the problem is, if the bishop doesn't get taken, this rook comes down and takes the pawn. It'll be backed up by the bishop. Right? The rook's attacking the queen, and their next move is going to come across and take the bishop. So the rook's going to capture a pawn, 1 point, and a bishop, 3 points, for a total of 4 points ahead. And that's what's going to happen next move. Computer's rook comes down, and then computer comes across and takes the bishop. So faced with a 4-point loss. So Kasparov's faced with a 4-point loss, so decides to actually take that bishop. Right? So takes the bishop, sacrificing his queen, giving up 9 points. But if we think about it carefully, he's managed to take first the bishop, then the rook. And if we remember the points values from before, right, bishop plus a rook is really 3 points for the bishop, 5 points for the rook. 3 plus 5 equals 8. And on the other side, he sacrificed his queen, which is worth 9 points. So the difference between the two is only 1. Right? So it's 8 points for 9 points. Kasparov thought, well, he was about to lose 4 points. He was going to lose his pawn and then his bishop. Better to sacrifice his queen and get a rook and a bishop. That's 8 points in exchange for the 9 points that he's had to sacrifice. Right? So that's what he did. The only thing is, without your queen is your most powerful piece. It does make things difficult. All right, computer's next move, again, a real excellent move, a real doozy of a move. Pawn to c4. By playing pawn to c4, the idea is to try and trade off pawns, because remember, the pawns shelter the king. Right? So when he does pawn up to c4, black has no choice but to lose a pawn. Right? His knight's in danger, his pawn's in danger. So he doesn't have a choice. He's got to lose pawn for pawn, otherwise his knight's gone. So he does pawn takes pawn. Computer plays queen takes, and now the queen's threatening the bishop. Right? Black's bishop on c6 is in danger. The queen's coming down to attack that bishop. There's nothing protecting the bishop. So really the only move that black can do is play king to b7 to protect his bishop. But what's white's next move going to be? Okay, the computer's got a killer of a move coming up. It's checkmate next move. See if you can see what white's next move is going to be to make it checkmate. You can type that into your chat boxes. And I'll give you a couple of clues, because here's one clue. This bishop is extremely powerful from g3, coming down and covering all of those black squares. So that cuts off a lot of spaces that black might have to try and escape. And white can do a checkmate in one move with the help of that bishop. Another clue is this rook is also in a really powerful position. It's controlling all of those squares down there. Because he's got those two pieces in great positions, he can use those two pieces to support his most powerful piece, the queen, and the queen is going to be the one who delivers the checkmate. We've had a few incorrect suggestions, but the correct move is actually queen to a6, and that's checkmate. The queen's now threatening the king. That's check. Can't capture it. Remember, there's 3 things if you're in check, 3 things to try and do. Can't take it because it's protected by the rook. Can't block, obviously, because it's too close. He's right next door. And if the king tries to move to any of those 3 squares, or 4 empty squares nearby, they're all covered. Bishop covers them. Queen covers the rest of them. So between the queen and the bishop, we've ended up with a checkmate. There is nothing black can do to get out of it here. All right, so we're going to wrap things up now. We've gone a little bit over time today, but I hope that you guys didn't mind that. We were using, just in case we have had some questions about this before, we're using a new piece of software called Chess Microbase. Now, this software that enables games to be viewed and shared and displayed and add comments to them and so forth, Chess Microbase, it's a web-based program. It's free to use, so you just go to chessmicrobase.com. And I'm going to be using that. It seems to be a little bit better than some of the software that we were using before that cost $300-400 for the software, and this is free. So chessmicrobase.com, I can recommend that. We've used that today for our webinar. I'll also be sharing on our website not just the video of this game, but also a link so that you guys can actually get exactly this screen on your computers at home or at school, and you can just click through the moves of the game. You'll see all the comments that are down the bottom of the screen, and all of those comments will show up in that when you click on the link. It just shows you the game. So that's a really good, cool feature of Chess Microbase, is that you can share games with other people and you can put them on your websites and things like that. So I'll be doing that with this game, having just discovered the awesomeness of Chess Microbase. So yeah, we'll be posting that with the video later on today, hopefully. And thanks very much for being part of it. We look forward to seeing you next week.